The rain fell in thick sheets that night, drumming against the roof of the old house like 1,000 restless spirits. The wind howled through the trees, their gnarled branches clawing at the dark sky. In the small town of Greystone, November was always a time of shadows and whispers, but this night felt different. There was a weight in the air, a sense of something lurking just beyond the edge of sight. Inside the house, Sarah sat curled up on the one couch, a faded blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She stared at the flickering light of the fireplace, the flames dancing like ghosts. The old house creaked and groaned, settling into the damp earth, but to Sarah it felt alive. She had moved in only a few weeks ago, inheriting the place from her late grandmother. It was a charming, if somewhat airy old home, filled with memories and secrets. As the rain poured down, she tried to focus on the book in her lap, but her mind wandered. She thought of her grandmother, a woman of strange habits and even stranger stories. Every house has its spirits, she used to say, her eyes twinkling with mischief. You just have to know how to listen. A loud clap of thunder startled Sarah, making her jump. The lights flickered and dimmed, casting long shadows across the room. She glanced at the old clock on the wall. It was just past 8. It felt later, as if the night had swallowed the hours whole. The wind howled again, and Sarah shivered, pulling the blanket tighter around her. Suddenly, a soft sound broke through the storm, a faint tapping at the window. She turned her head, heart racing. The rain pelted the glass, but there it was again, a gentle knock. Sarah stood up, curiosity getting the better of her fear. She approached the window, peering out into the blackness. The street was empty, the only light coming from the flickering street lamp at the corner. Just as she was about to turn away, she saw a figure standing beneath the lamp, cloaked in shadows. The rain poured down, obscuring her view, but she could make out the outline of a person. A chill ran down her spine. Who could be out there in this weather? Hello, she called out, her voice trembling. The figure didn't move, just stood there, as if waiting for something. Can I help you? There was no response, only the sound of the rain. Sarah's heart raced as she felt a strange pull towards the figure. She reached for the door, hesitating for a moment. What if it was just a trick of the light? What if it was something worse? But the curiosity won. She opened the door, the cold air hitting her like a slap. The rain soaked her almost instantly, but she didn't care. She stepped out onto the porch, squinting through the sheets of rain. Are you okay? She shouted, but the figure remained silent. As she took a step forward, the figure moved. It glided closer, emerging from the shadows. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. It was a woman, her face pale and gaunt, hair hanging in wet strands around her shoulders. Her eyes were dark, sunken deep into her skull, and her mouth twisted into a strange smile. Help me, the woman whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm. Please. Sarah took a step back, fear flooding her veins. What do you want? The woman pointed towards the woods at the edge of the property, her finger trembling. They're waiting for me. I can't go back. Who? Sarah asked, her heart racing. The woods loomed behind the woman, dark and foreboding, as if they were alive, ready to swallow her whole. They're angry, the woman continued, her voice growing fainter. I shouldn't have come here. Before Sarah could respond, the woman turned and fled into the rain, disappearing into the darkness. Sarah stood frozen for a moment, the cold seeping into her bones. She wanted to run inside, to lock the door and forget this night, but something held her there. a whisper of a promise, a thread of curiosity. With a deep breath, she stepped off the porch and headed toward the woods. The rain soaked her clothes, but she didn't care. She had to know. As she walked, the trees loomed overhead, their branches twisting like fingers in the storm. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and something else, something rotten. The deeper she went, the more the world around her seemed to change. The sound of the rain faded, replaced by an eerie silence. The trees closed in, their trunks thick and gnarled, blocking out the little light that remained. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. She felt watched, as if eyes were boring into her from the shadows. Suddenly she heard a rustle behind her. She spun around, breath catching in her throat. Nothing, just the wind whispering through the leaves. She took a step back, her instincts screaming at her to run, but she pressed on, driven by a force she couldn't explain. As she ventured deeper, she stumbled upon a clearing. The moon broke through the clouds, casting an eerie glow over the scene. In the center stood a circle of stones, ancient and weathered, covered in moss. It looked like a shrine, and Sarah felt drawn to it. As she stepped closer, she noticed something in the center, a small, weathered doll, its porcelain face cracked and dirty. It was dressed in tattered clothes, and its eyes seemed to follow her. A chill ran down her spine. "Help me," a voice echoed, and she turned, heart racing. The woman stood at the edge of the clearing, her face now twisted in fear. "You shouldn't be here." "Who are you?" Sarah demanded, stepping back towards the stones. "What is this place?" "They're coming," the woman cried, her voice rising in panic. "You have to leave." Before Sarah could respond, shadows began to crawl from the trees, dark figures emerging from the gloom. They moved with a fluid grace, their forms indistinct, shifting like smoke. Sarah's heart raced as they surrounded her, their whispers filling the air, a cacophony of voices that chilled her to the bone. "Join us," they hissed, their voices a haunting melody. "Join us in the darkness." The woman screamed, reaching for Sarah. "Run, please, run." But Sarah was frozen in place, terror gripping her. The shadows closed in, their cold breath wrapping around her. She felt their fingers brush against her skin, icy and clammy. "Help us," they whispered, their voices a chorus of despair. "We need you." With a sudden burst of adrenaline, Sarah turned and ran, the shadows chasing her through the trees. She could hear their laughter, a sound that echoed in her mind, mocking her fear. The rain pounded against her, but she pushed through, branches clawing at her arms as she stumbled through the underbrush. Finally, she burst into the clearing where the house stood, gasping for breath. She slammed the door shut behind her, locking it tight. The storm raged outside, but inside all was quiet. She leaned against the door, heart pounding, trying to calm her racing thoughts. What had she seen? What had chased her? She looked around the dimly lit room, the shadows creeping along the walls, and felt a sense of dread wash over her. The house felt different now, as if it were watching her, waiting for something. Hours passed, or maybe only minutes. The rain continued to fall, but the storm outside began to fade. Sarah tried to convince herself it was just her imagination, that the shadows were nothing but tricks of the light. But deep down she knew something was wrong. As she sat on the couch, staring into the dying embers of the fire, she heard a soft knock at the door. Her heart leapt into her throat. She held her breath, listening intently. Another knock, more insistent this time. "Sarah," a voice called, soft and haunting. It was the woman from the woods. "Please, let me in." Panic surged through her. She didn't want to open the door, didn't want to face whatever lay beyond. But the voice was filled with desperation, a plea that tugged at her heart. "Please," the voice came again, trembling. "I can't stay out here." With shaking hands, Sarah approached the door. She could feel the weight of the night pressing down on her, the shadows creeping closer. She hesitated, heart pounding, before finally unlocking the door and pulling it open. The woman stood there, drenched and trembling, her eyes wide with fear. "Thank you," she whispered, stepping inside. "You don't know how much this means." "Who are you?" Sarah asked, backing away as the woman closed the door behind her. "What do you want?" "I'm lost," the woman said, her voice breaking. "I can't go back. They won't let me." "What do you mean?" Sarah pressed, feeling a mix of fear and sympathy. "Who won't let you?" "The ones in the woods," the woman replied, her gaze darting to the windows. "They're angry. They want me to join them." "Join them?" Sarah echoed, confusion washing over her. "Why?" "I was one of them," the woman said, her voice low and haunted. "I was trapped in the darkness, but I escaped. Now they want me back." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "What do you mean you were one of them?" The woman's expression turned grave. "They feed on fear, on despair. They want to take you too. You have to be careful." Before Sarah could respond, a loud crash echoed from outside. The wind howled, and the lights flickered ominously. The woman's eyes widened in terror. "They're here." Panic surged through Sarah as she glanced towards the window. Shadows moved outside, swirling in the darkness, and she felt a sense of dread wash over her. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice trembling. "We have to hide," the woman urged, grabbing Sarah's arm. "They can't find us." They rushed to the back of the house, finding a small closet tucked away in the corner. The woman pulled Sarah inside, closing the door just as another crash echoed outside. They huddled together in the dark, breathless and trembling, the sound of the storm drowning out their heartbeats. "What do they want?" Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. "They want to take you," the woman replied, her voice shaking. "They want your fear, your soul." Sarah's mind raced. She thought of the shadows, the way they had whispered to her, tempting her with promises of darkness. "Why me?" she asked, fear creeping into her voice. "Because you're here," the woman said, her eyes wide and desperate. "They can sense your fear. They thrive on it." The shadows outside began to swirl, their whispers growing louder, a chorus of voices calling out for her. "Join us," they sang, a haunting melody that sent chills down her spine. Sarah clutched the woman's arm, panic rising in her chest. "What do we do?" she asked again, her voice trembling. "We wait," the woman said, her expression serious. "We have to wait until they leave." Time stretched on, the storm raging outside, the shadows clawing at the walls of the house. Sarah's heart raced as she listened to the whispers, the voices growing louder, more insistent. She felt the weight of their presence pressing in on her, suffocating. Suddenly the door to the closet creaked open, and Sarah gasped, heart racing. The woman's eyes widened in terror. "No," she cried, but it was too late. A shadow loomed in the doorway, dark and formless, its presence cold and oppressive. It reached for Sarah, fingers stretching towards her, and she felt a rush of fear wash over her. She stumbled back, trying to escape, but the woman grabbed her arm. "Don't let it in," she shouted, pulling Sarah closer. The shadow paused, as if considering, then surged forward. Sarah felt a wave of despair wash over her, a feeling of hopelessness that threatened to swallow her whole. She fought against it, pushing back against the darkness. "Stay with me," the woman cried, her voice breaking. "You have to fight." With a sudden burst of determination, Sarah focused on the warmth of the fire, the flickering light that had once brought her comfort. She reached deep within herself, searching for the strength to resist. "No," she shouted, her voice echoing in the darkness. "You can't have me." The shadow recoiled, its form shifting and writhing as if in pain. The whispers grew frantic, a cacophony of voices that filled the air. "Join us," they cried, desperation creeping into their tone. But Sarah stood firm, focusing on the light, the warmth of the fire. "I won't join you," she declared, her voice growing stronger. "I refuse." With a final surge of energy, she pushed against the darkness, and the shadow shrieked, a sound that echoed through the house. It retreated, swelling back into the night, leaving only silence in its wake. Breathless, Sarah collapsed to the ground, heart racing. The woman knelt beside her, eyes wide with awe. "You did it," she whispered, disbelief etched on her face. "You fought them." "I don't understand," Sarah panted, trying to catch her breath. "What just happened?" "They feed on fear," the woman explained, her voice trembling. "But you found your strength, you resisted." As the storm began to fade, Sarah felt a sense of calm wash over her. The shadows had retreated, but she knew they were still out there, lurking in the darkness. She looked at the woman, who seemed both relieved and exhausted. "Are you okay?" Sarah asked, concern creeping into her voice. The woman nodded, though her expression remained somber. "I'll be fine. But we have to stay vigilant. They won't give up easily." As the rain finally began to slow, the first hints of dawn broke through the clouds. The world outside looked different, the light casting long shadows on the ground. Sarah felt a sense of hope, a flicker of warmth in her chest. But deep down, she knew the battle wasn't over. The darkness would always be there, waiting for a moment of weakness. She glanced at the woman, who seemed to understand her thoughts. "We'll face it together," the woman said, a determined look in her eyes. "You're not alone anymore." And as the first rays of sunlight broke through the storm, Sarah felt a sense of resolve. She would fight against the darkness no matter what it took. Together they would stand against the shadows that haunted their lives, ready to face whatever horrors lay ahead. As the sun rose, casting light upon the old house, Sarah knew that the rainy November night had changed her forever. The darkness would always be a part of her, but she had found her strength, her courage. And with that, she would never be alone again.